A man stands alone on a blood-soaked clifftop, enemy bullets tearing through the air around him, grenades exploding within feet of where he works. His hands, slick with the blood of his brothers and arms, tie another rope around another broken body. Every single soldier around him has retreated. Every officer has ordered withdrawal. The Japanese are closing in, their battle cries echoing across the plateau. But this man refuses to leave. One by one, using nothing but a rope and a knot, he barely understands himself. He lowers 75 wounded soldiers down a 400-foot cliff to safety, all through the night. 12 hours of hell. And he does it all without a single weapon to defend himself, not even a knife, nothing. The same army that tried to court-martial him, the same brothers who threatened to shoot him in the back, the same officers who called him a coward and tried to have him declared mentally ill. They all owe their lives to the one man they said would never make it in combat. His name was Desmond Doss, and this is his story. If this sounds unbelievable to you, then make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear is the absolute truth, verified by military records, Medal of Honor citations, and the testimonies of the men who were there. It's 1929 in Lynchburg, Virginia. A small, skinny kid is roughhousing with his brother. Things get out of hand. The 10-year-old Desmond Doss nearly beats his brother to death. The moment haunts him for the rest of his life. But it's another moment, years earlier, that truly shaped who Desmond would become. In the Doss family home hung a framed poster of the 10 Commandments, each one illustrated with vivid biblical scenes. Young Desmond would stare at that poster for hours, but one image captured his imagination more than any other. It showed Cain standing over his brother Abel, a club raised high, murder in his eyes. The 6th commandment read clearly, "Thou shalt not kill." Young Desmond wondered what could possibly possess a man to want to kill his own brother. That question would stay with him his entire life and make it impossible for him to ever accept the idea of taking another human life. Desmond's childhood was not easy. His father, William Thomas Doss, was a carpenter and a World War I veteran. But the Great War had broken something inside him. What we'd now call PTSD manifested in bouts of heavy drinking and violence. Desmond witnessed his father's alcohol-fueled rages. In one terrifying incident, his father pulled a gun during a fight with a relative. Desmond's mother, Bertha, stepped between them, demanding the weapon. She handed it to young Desmond and told him to run and hide it. That moment cemented something in Desmond's mind. He made a vow that day. He would never touch a gun again. But Bertha Doss was more than a woman who stood between guns and family members. She was a devoted Seventh-day Adventist, and she raised her 3 children, Audrey, Desmond, and Harold, in that faith. She taught them to keep the Sabbath holy from sundown Friday until sundown Saturday. She taught them vegetarianism. She taught them that all human life was sacred. She instilled in them a deep faith in God and strict adherence to the Bible's teachings. For Desmond, the middle child, these lessons took root deeper than perhaps anyone could have imagined. The Doss family wasn't wealthy. During the Great Depression, Desmond had to leave school after completing just 1 year of high school. At 14, he went to work at the Lynchburg Lumber Company to help support his family. Later, he found work with the city of Lynchburg, and eventually became a joiner at the Newport News Naval Shipyard. It was hard work, honest work, and Desmond threw himself into it. He became a deacon at the Park Avenue Seventh-day Adventist Church at age 21. He was quiet, soft-spoken, gentle, not the kind of person you would ever imagine in uniform. In 1941, Desmond met a young woman named Dorothy Schutte. According to some accounts, they met at church in Lynchburg where Dorothy was selling Adventist books. Desmond was smitten. Dorothy was beautiful, intelligent, and shared his faith. Their courtship was sweet and earnest. 2 young people finding love in a world that was about to be torn apart by war. Desmond would walk miles to visit her, and he even donated blood at a hospital after hearing a radio appeal for volunteers. Their love grew deeper as the world grew darker. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack that would pull America into World War II. Desmond Doss heard the news like millions of other Americans. His brother Harold immediately joined the Navy and was assigned to serve aboard the USS Lindsay. Friends and neighbors enlisted by the thousands, and Desmond felt something stir inside him, a conflict that would define the rest of his life. Here's what most people don't understand. Desmond Doss could have avoided the war entirely. completely legally. He had two legitimate reasons to stay home. First, his job at the Newport News Naval Shipyard was classified as essential war work. Defense industry workers were offered automatic deferments. Second, as a Seventh-day Adventist conscientious objector, he could have refused military service altogether. Thousands of others did exactly that. Over 70,000 men were designated conscientious objectors during World War II. Many refused to serve in any capacity. Nobody would have blamed Desmond Doss for staying home, staying safe, and keeping his hands clean. But that's not what Desmond did. In his own words, he felt like it was an honor to serve his country according to the dictates of his conscience. He believed World War II was a just war. He believed in freedom. He believed that evil had to be stopped. He just couldn't bring himself to kill another human being. So on April 1st, 1942, Desmond Doss voluntarily enlisted in the United States Army, not as a conscientious objector, but as what he called a conscientious cooperator. He would wear the uniform. He would salute the flag. He would go into combat. He would do everything a soldier was expected to do. Everything except one thing. He would not touch a weapon. Before shipping out to basic training, Desmond and Dorothy were married on August 17, 1942, in Richmond, Virginia. It was a happy day, a moment of joy before the storm. Dorothy gave him a Bible as a gift, a small pocket Bible that Desmond would carry with him through every battle. That Bible would become as much a part of his gear as any rifle was to other soldiers. It was his weapon, his comfort, his connection to the faith that sustained him. Fort Jackson, South Carolina. This is where Desmond's hell began. He was assigned to the 77th Infantry Division, 307th Infantry Regiment, Company B, 1st Battalion. The 77th was called the Statue of Liberty Division, and it drew most of its men from the urban streets of New York City. Here comes Desmond Doss, a skinny, soft-spoken kid from rural Virginia with a gentle southern drawl. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he doesn't eat meat. He refuses to train with weapons, and he insists on getting a pass every Saturday to attend church for his Sabbath. To his fellow soldiers, Desmond Doss was everything a soldier should not be. They saw him as weak. They saw him as a coward. They saw him as a liability who would get them all killed in combat. The harassment started immediately, and it was relentless. During evening prayers, men would throw boots at him. They called him every name you can imagine. They cursed him, mocked him, made his life absolutely miserable. One soldier even threatened him directly, saying, "Doss, as soon as we get into combat, I'll make sure you don't come back alive." But the harassment didn't just come from enlisted men. Desmond's commanding officers wanted him gone too. They saw him as a problem that needed to be eliminated. Sergeant Howell and Captain Jack Glover tried everything they could think of to force Doss out of the Army. First, they tried to have him discharged under Section 8 for mental illness, claiming his religious beliefs proved he was psychologically unfit for service. That attempt failed. The military doctors ruled that religious conviction did not constitute insanity. So, they tried a different approach. They tormented him with grueling labor. They assigned him the worst, most backbreaking details they could find. They denied him passes. They denied him privileges. They put pressure on him from every angle. Captain Glover would later admit that he went to his battalion commander, Colonel Gerald Cooney, and suggested that Doss should be transferred out of the unit entirely. The captain couldn't stand having this unarmed pacifist in his company. Then came the incident with Captain Cunningham. During training, Cunningham announced that only men who participated in rifle training would be allowed passes to go into town. Desmond approached him and politely pointed out that his file clearly stated he didn't have to touch a weapon. Cunningham saw an opportunity. In front of all the other soldiers, he tried to humiliate Desmond by forcing a rifle into his hands. He told Desmond to take the rifle or he would be court-martialed. Desmond let the weapon fall to the ground. As Cunningham began the court-martial process, another officer stepped in and told Cunningham to back off and respect what was written in Doss's record. Cunningham relented and gave Desmond his pass, but the harassment never stopped. The worst came when Desmond's unit was about to get leave after completing basic training. Desmond was looking forward to seeing Dorothy one more time before deployment, but his refusal to carry a weapon led to his arrest for insubordination. He was thrown in jail. Captain Glover and Dorothy visited him there, begging him to plead guilty so he could be released without further trouble. Desmond refused to compromise his beliefs. At the court-martial proceeding, he pleaded not guilty. What happened next saved Desmond's military career. When Desmond's father heard what was happening, he didn't rush in with a letter from a general, as depicted in the Hacksaw Ridge movie. What actually happened was this. Tom Doss contacted Carlisle B. Haynes, the chairman of the church's War Service Commission in Washington, D.C. Haynes then contacted the regimental commander, Colonel Stephen S. Hamilton, asking if it was necessary for him to come investigate the situation personally. The colonel said no and promised they would straighten things out. The court-martial charges were dropped, though Desmond had to wait for his furlough. Eventually, he was given a 3-day pass to go home and see his brother Harold before Harold deployed overseas with the Navy. But something interesting happened during this brutal period of basic training. The men began to notice things. When soldiers came back from marches with blistered, bleeding feet, it was Desmond who knew how to treat them. When someone collapsed from heat stroke, it was Desmond who was instantly at their side with his own canteen, giving away his water. Despite all the abuse, despite all the mockery, Desmond never held a grudge. He treated those who mistreated him with kindness and gentle courtesy. He lived by the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Summer of 1904, the 7th Infantry Division shipped out to the Pacific Theater. Their first stop was Guam, part of the Mariana Islands. The landing came in July 1904, and for the first time, Desmond's fellow soldiers saw what their Bible-carrying medic was really made of. The fighting on Guam was brutal. Japanese forces were deeply entrenched, defending every inch of ground with fanatical determination. Artillery and small arms fire poured down on American troops constantly. And there was Desmond Doss, running through that fire. While bullets whizzed past his head and mortar shells exploded around him, Desmond repeatedly risked his life to reach wounded soldiers and drag them to safety. Men who had threatened to shoot him in basic training now watched in awe as this unarmed pacifist charged into enemy fire to save their lives. The men who had mocked him, who had thrown boots at him during prayers, who had made his life a living hell, were the same men whose lives he saved on Guam. For his actions under fire, Desmond Doss was awarded his first Bronze Star for valor. The medal citation specifically noted his exceptional courage in aiding wounded soldiers while exposed to enemy fire. From Guam, the 307th moved to Leyte in the Philippines. The fighting there was even worse. The island campaign lasted from November 1944 through February 1945, and it was a nightmare of jungle warfare, ambushes, and desperate, close combat. During one action, Desmond saw 2 wounded soldiers in an open field under intense enemy fire. One of the fallen was a soldier named Glenn, a man Desmond had become close to. Without hesitation, Desmond ran across that field. When he reached them, Glenn had already been killed by a Japanese machine gunner. Desmond couldn't save his friend, but he could save the other wounded soldier. He fashioned a stretcher from bamboo and evacuated the man to safety, while enemy fire continued to rake the ground around him. For these actions at Leyte, Desmond was awarded his second Bronze Star. The shy kid from Virginia who couldn't hurt a fly had proven himself twice over in combat, but Leyte gave Desmond something else too, something terrible. In the wet, cold, muddy conditions of the Philippine jungle, sleeping in foxholes, constantly soaked and shivering, Desmond contracted tuberculosis. He didn't know it yet. The disease was silent, biding its time, but it had already begun its work. It would haunt him for the rest of his life. By the time the 7th Infantry Division arrived on Okinawa in late April 1945, every single doubt about Desmond Doss had been erased. The men knew, the officers knew. This medic was there for them. He would run into hell itself to save them. Any reservations they had about fighting alongside an unarmed soldier had turned to respect and something more. Something like reverence. Okinawa. The word still carries weight among World War II veterans. The Battle of Okinawa, which lasted from April 1st to June 21st, 1945, was the largest and bloodiest battle in the Pacific Theater. It was called the Typhoon of Steel for the sheer amount of metal that flew through the air. More than 12,000 Americans would die there. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers would die there. At least 100,000 Okinawan civilians were killed or forced to commit suicide by the Japanese military. It was hell on earth. The Japanese had spent years preparing Okinawa's defenses. They had turned the island, just 350 miles from mainland Japan, into a death trap. They dug into the hills and mountains, creating elaborate networks of tunnels, caves, and underground complexes. The terrain was treacherous, with steep ridges and cliffs dominating the landscape. Every hill was a fortress. Every cave concealed machine gun nests and artillery positions. The Japanese strategy was simple: make the Americans pay for every inch with blood. On April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, the invasion began. In what felt like either a blessing or a cruel joke, the initial landing was virtually unopposed. 50,000 men of the U.S. 10th Army, under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., went ashore and established a beachhead about 5 miles long. They walked upright across the beaches, something entirely unheard of in Pacific warfare. Admiral Spruance famously messaged Admiral Nimttz, saying, "I may be crazy, but it looks like the Japanese have quit the war, at least in this sector." Nimttz responded, "Delete all after crazy." The Japanese hadn't quit, they were waiting. They had let the Americans land because they wanted to draw them deep into the island's interior, into the killing zones they had prepared. As American forces pushed south, they ran headlong into the outer defenses of the Shuri Line. This was a system of heavily fortified positions anchored by Shuri Castle, with a series of ridges and hills creating interlocking fields of fire. The rapid American advance came to a bloody, grinding halt. The 10th Infantry Division's objective was a place that would become infamous, a steep, jagged escarpment that the American soldiers called Hacksaw Ridge. Its real name was the Maeda Escarpment. It sat squarely on the right flank of the 96th Infantry Division's advance. The escarpment was roughly 400 feet high, with the top 35 feet forming a sheer overhang. American troops had to scale this cliff using cargo nets, essentially climbing a 400-foot-tall rock wall under enemy fire, and then fight for the plateau at the top. On April 29, 1945, the 307th Infantry Regiment moved into position on the top of Hacksaw Ridge. The 1st Battalion, including Desmond's Company B, climbed those cargo nets on May 2nd, joining what remained of A Company, which had been nearly annihilated taking the position. The Japanese had transformed the top of the ridge into a maze of death. Every cave concealed soldiers. Every tunnel led to another firing position. Pillboxes were hidden so well that soldiers couldn't see them until they were already in the kill zone. The fighting was hand-to-hand, yard by yard, hour after hour. For days, the men of the 307th held out on top of that ridge. The Japanese sent waves of counterattacks. Artillery and mortar fire rained down constantly. Machine gun fire swept across the plateau. American forces used every weapon they had: napalm, flamethrowers, demolition charges, phosphorus grenades, bazookas, everything. The ridge became what one soldier called all hell rolled into one. Bodies piled up. The wounded lay scattered across the contested ground, crying out for help that often never came. Medics were priority targets for Japanese snipers. They knew that killing medics would demoralize the Americans and leave the wounded to die slowly. May 5th, 1945. It was Desmond's Sabbath. From sundown Friday until sundown Saturday, Seventh-day Adventists observe a holy day of rest. Desmond typically tried to avoid combat operations on his Sabbath, but on this day, he was the only medic available to advance with the rest of the men. The unit was close to taking the ridge from the enemy. His brothers needed him. So, Desmond went anyway, Bible in his pocket, prayer on his lips. The Japanese unleashed everything they had. A massive counterattack hit the Americans with overwhelming force. Artillery shells crashed down like thunder. Mortars walked across the American positions. Machine gun fire swept the plateau. Grenades exploded. Japanese soldiers swarmed out of their caves and tunnels, screaming as they charged with rifles and bayonets. It was chaos. It was hell. Within moments, approximately 75 Americans fell wounded, and the remaining men were in danger of being completely overrun. Officers ordered an immediate retreat. Every man who could still move scrambled back to the edge of the cliff and descended the cargo nets as fast as they could. Of the 155 soldiers who had climbed up that morning, only 55 were able to retreat under their own power. The rest lay wounded, scattered across enemy-held territory, abandoned, left for dead. The sounds of battle continued to rage above, and every single American soldier except one obeyed the order to retreat. Desmond Doss refused to leave. He looked at those wounded men, his brothers, and he couldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. They were his men, and he could not leave them behind even if it cost him his life. So while everyone else climbed down to safety, Desmond stayed on that blood-soaked plateau alone, surrounded by enemy soldiers, and he went to work. The scene that unfolded over the next 12 hours defies comprehension. Desmond crawled across the battlefield on his hands and knees. Japanese soldiers were everywhere, moving through their tunnel networks, firing at anything that moved. Grenades exploded constantly. Bullets kicked up dirt all around him. Desmond ignored all of it. He focused entirely on finding the wounded. One by one, he located them. Men with shattered limbs, men with sucking chest wounds, men barely clinging to life. He treated them as best he could in the chaos, applying bandages, administering morphine, giving them water. Then came the hardest part. He had to get them off the cliff. The edge of the escarpment was 35 feet of sheer rock face, with a 365-foot drop beyond that. Desmond dragged each wounded soldier to the edge. He didn't have enough rope to do it the way it should be done. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. And that's when something extraordinary happened. Desmond later said that a thought came to his mind, something he'd never seen or heard of before in his life. It was a special knot, what he called a double bowling knot. He had learned a version of it years earlier when he helped rescue flood victims in West Virginia. But this variation came to him in the moment, a gift from God as far as Desmond was concerned. The knot allowed him to create a rope-supported litter that he could control from the top of the cliff. It was ingenious. It was perfect. It was exactly what he needed. Desmond tied the rope around each wounded soldier. He double-checked the knot. Then he grabbed the rope with both hands and began to lower them, one by one, down the face of that cliff to friendly hands waiting 35 feet below. His hands bled. The rope burned his palms. His muscles screamed. But Desmond didn't stop. After each soldier was safely lowered, he crawled back into the fire-swept area and found another man, and another, and another. All through this, Desmond prayed the same prayer over and over. Lord, please help me get one more. Every single time he lowered a soldier to safety, he prayed it again. Just one more. Help me get one more. He later said, I kept praying, Lord, please help me get more, and more, one more, until there was none left, and I'm the last one down. The men waiting at the bottom of the cliff could barely believe what they were seeing. Wounded soldiers kept appearing over the edge of the escarpment, dangling from that rope. First one, then another, then another. Men they had left for dead. Men they thought were gone forever. One by one, their brothers came back from hell, lowered by the medic who wouldn't retreat. Soldiers who had been lying on top of that ridge, listening to the sounds of battle, certain they would die there, suddenly felt Desmond's hands on them, heard his voice telling them they were going to make it, felt that rope being tied around their bodies. One soldier later reported that Japanese soldiers got within a few feet of Desmond with rifles and bayonets, but before they could shoot him, wounded Americans lying nearby who still had their weapons would kill the enemy soldiers first. The wounded were protecting their medic while he saved them. It was a partnership born of desperation and brotherhood. There's another account that's even more extraordinary. After the war, a Japanese soldier recalled that he had Desmond Doss in his rifle sights multiple times that day. He had a clear shot at the lone American medic working in the open, but every single time he tried to fire, his weapon jammed. Every single time. Some people might call that luck. Desmond called it a miracle. The men he saved called it divine intervention. For 5 hours straight, Desmond worked. 5 hours of hell. 5 hours of crawling through blood and mud and death. 5 hours of lifting and dragging and lowering men to safety. His captain, Captain Vernon, had taken 155 men up the escarpment that morning. By nightfall, 55 had made it down under their own power. Captain Vernon looked at the wounded, who had been brought down, and did the math. 75 men, at least, maybe more. All saved by one unarmed medic. When asked later how many men he thought he saved, Desmond's humility wouldn't let him claim more than 50. Captain Vernon insisted it was 100. They compromised on 75. And that's the number that went into the official Medal of Honor citation. But here's something you need to understand. Desmond Doss didn't save just Americans that day. Fellow soldiers later reported seeing Japanese bodies with American bandages on them. Desmond had treated enemy wounded too. In the heat of battle, in the middle of that chaos, with Japanese soldiers actively trying to kill him, Desmond still saw human beings who needed help. He couldn't help all of them, but the ones he could reach he treated, even the enemy. The battle for Hacksaw Ridge continued for days. The Americans finally took the position on May 6th after 11 days of fighting. More than 3,000 Japanese soldiers had died defending it. The carnage was beyond description, but the 77th Infantry Division had accomplished their objective, and a huge part of that success came down to morale. When soldiers saw Desmond Doss refuse to leave the wounded, when they saw him lower 75 men to safety through 12 hours of hell, something changed in them. If their medic could do that, if he could show that kind of courage without even carrying a weapon, then they could do anything. Desmond stayed with his unit. He continued treating wounded under fire. On May 21st, 15 days after his miraculous rescue on the ridge, Desmond was involved in a night attack on high ground near Shuri. It was another desperate fight. As the fighting intensified, Desmond remained in exposed territory while the rest of his company took cover. He couldn't leave the wounded. He fearlessly risked being mistaken for an infiltrating Japanese soldier as he moved through the darkness, giving aid to injured men until a grenade landed at his feet. The explosion sent him flying. Shrapnel tore through his legs and up into his hip. The pain was blinding. For the first time in the entire campaign, Desmond Doss was seriously wounded. But even then, even with metal embedded in his own body, he didn't call for another medic. He knew that would mean pulling someone else from cover and putting them at risk. Instead, Desmond treated his own injuries as best he could and waited. He waited 5 hours before litter bearers were finally able to reach him. When they did reach him and started carrying him to safety, an enemy tank attack forced them to take cover. As Desmond lay on that stretcher, he saw another soldier nearby who was more critically wounded than himself. Without hesitation, Desmond crawled off the litter and directed the bearers to take the other man first. Wounded, in pain, bleeding, he still put someone else's life ahead of his own. As he waited for the litter bearers to return, Desmond was struck again. This time, a sniper's bullet tore through his arm, shattering the bone, leaving his left arm hanging useless. The pain must have been indescribable, but Desmond Doss was not done. With magnificent fortitude, he took a rifle stock, not to use the rifle, but to use the stock as a makeshift splint, and bound it to his shattered arm. Then he crawled, 300 yards across rough, contested ground, back to the aid station. Every movement agony, every yard a test of will, but he made it. Desmond was evacuated from Okinawa on May 21st aboard the USS Mercy. His war was over, but the toll it had taken on his body was severe. He had been wounded 4 times during the Okinawa campaign. He had 17 pieces of shrapnel embedded in his body. His left arm had been shattered by a sniper, and the tuberculosis he'd contracted in Leyte was getting worse, though he didn't fully understand how bad it was yet. October 12th, 1945. The White House lawn, Washington, D.C. President Harry S. Truman stood in the warm autumn sun, presiding over a ceremony to present the Medal of Honor to 15 servicemen from the European and Pacific theaters. Among them stood Corporal Desmond Thomas Doss, recently promoted, standing at attention in his uniform. Of the 16 million men who had served in uniform during World War II, only 431 received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Desmond was about to become one of them, the first and only conscientious objector to receive the honor during World War II. As Desmond's citation was read aloud, President Truman warmly shook his hand and held it the entire time. The citation detailed everything: the jagged escarpment 400 feet high, the approximately 75 casualties, the refusal to seek cover, the rope-supported litter, the multiple acts of heroism on May 2nd, May 5th, and May 21st, the wounds, the sacrifice. When the reading finished, Truman looked at Desmond and said something that would stay with him forever. "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." But there was another moment at that ceremony that meant just as much to Desmond. His commanding officer had brought a gift. During the chaos of Desmond's evacuation from Okinawa, he had lost his Bible, the one Dorothy had given him before he shipped out. Desmond thought it was gone forever, but his brothers in arms had gone back to Hacksaw Ridge after the fighting ended. They had searched the battlefield, that blood-soaked, body-strewn plateau, and they had found it. They found his Bible and brought it to him at the White House. Battered, worn, worse for wear, but found. That Bible meant more to Desmond than any medal ever could. When asked later about the Medal of Honor, Desmond's humility shone through. He said, "I feel that I received the Congressional Medal of Honor because I kept the golden rule that we read in Matthew 7:12. All things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them." Desmond Doss returned home to Dorothy and tried to resume his life. They had a son together, Desmond Tommy Doss Jr., born in 1946. Tommy would follow in his father's footsteps, serving as an Army medic and later as a firefighter and paramedic. But Desmond's war wounds made normal life nearly impossible. Before he was discharged from the Army in 1946, doctors discovered he had tuberculosis. The disease he'd contracted in the wet, cold conditions of Leyte had progressed. He would spend the next 5.5 years in and out of hospitals. The tuberculosis ravaged his body. Doctors had to surgically remove his left lung and 5 ribs. For the rest of his life, Desmond survived on a single lung. He was never able to work a full-time job again. Instead, he and Dorothy bought a small farm in Rising Fawn, Georgia, near Lookout Mountain. They raised vegetables and sold them to make ends meet. It was humble work, quiet work, but Desmond never complained. In 1962, something extraordinary happened. The Medal of Honor was celebrating its 100th anniversary. A ceremony was planned at the White House. The other living recipients of the Medal of Honor were asked to select one man from among their ranks to represent them all. They chose Desmond Doss. He stood in the White House and had a pleasant conversation with President John F. Kennedy. The other heroes had chosen the conscientious objector to represent them. Think about that. Desmond became active in speaking engagements, particularly in Seventh-day Adventist communities. He would teach groups of young boys and girls the bowl and knot he had used to save those 75 men. He wanted them to know that courage came in many forms, and that standing up for what you believe in, even when everyone else tells you you're wrong, is its own kind of bravery. In 1976, Desmond suffered another devastating blow. The experimental antibiotics that had been used to treat his tuberculosis caused a terrible side effect. He went completely deaf. All sound was stolen from him. For years, he lived in silence. But in 1988, medical technology had advanced enough that he was able to receive a cochlear implant. At 69 years old, Desmond heard again. It was another miracle in a life full of them. Dorothy died on November 17, 1991, in a car accident. Desmond had been driving her to the hospital for cancer treatment when the accident occurred. The loss devastated him. They had been married for 49 years. She had stood by him through all the mockery and basic training, through all the years in hospitals, through all the health problems and pain. She had been his rock. On July 1, 1993, Desmond married Frances May Dumont, a widow with 3 adult children. Frances took care of Desmond through his remaining years as his health continued to decline. In 1951, Camp Desmond T. Doss was established in Grand Ledge, Michigan, to help train young Seventh-day Adventist men for service in the military medical corps. The camp operated throughout the Korean and Vietnam Wars before the property was sold in 1908. In the early 1980s, a school in Lynchburg was renamed Desmond T. Doss Christian Academy. In 1990, a section of Highway 2 in Georgia between U.S. Highway 27 and Georgia Highway 193 in Walker County was named the Desmond T. Doss Medal of Honor Highway. In 2004, filmmaker Terry Benedict completed a documentary about Desmond called The Conscientious Objector. The film preserved Desmond's story and included interviews with Desmond himself, recorded late in his life, where he recounted his experiences in his own words. In 1959, Desmond had appeared on the television program This Is Your Life with Ralph Edwards, where his story was shared with a national audience. But the documentary went deeper, capturing the essence of the man and his unshakable faith. On March 23, 2006, Corporal Desmond Thomas Doss died at his home in Piedmont, Alabama. He was 87 years old. He had been hospitalized for difficulty breathing, and his single remaining lung had finally failed him. He died the same day as another Medal of Honor recipient, David Bleak. Desmond was buried on April 3, 2006, in the Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee. His grave is marked with a simple headstone, but his legacy towers far beyond any monument. In May 2007, a bronze statue of Desmond was unveiled at Veterans Memorial Park in Collegedale, Tennessee. The statue depicts him in uniform, saluting, his Bible visible. It's a fitting tribute to a man who served his country without compromise, who saved lives without taking them, who showed the world that courage and conviction can coexist. In 2016, director Mel Gibson brought Desmond's story to the world with the film Hacksaw Ridge, starring Andrew Garfield as Desmond. The film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and one for Best Sound Mixing and Best Film Editing. Garfield's portrayal earned him a nomination for Best Actor. The film introduced millions of people to Desmond's story, though even Gibson admitted that some of the true events had to be toned down because audiences wouldn't believe them. Think about what Desmond Doss accomplished. He was mocked, harassed, beaten, threatened, and nearly court-martialed for his beliefs. The army tried to declare him mentally ill. His fellow soldiers promised to kill him in combat. His officers wanted him gone. Every rational person told him he couldn't be a soldier without a weapon. Every expert said he'd be a liability. Every voice of conventional wisdom said he was wrong. And then he proved them all wrong in the most spectacular way possible. He went through hell on Guam and Leyte, earning 2 Bronze Stars for valor. He climbed a 400-foot cliff at Hacksaw Ridge into a nightmare of enemy fire. He stayed behind when everyone else retreated. He saved 75 men, lowering them one by one down a cliff face with a rope and a knot. He prayed the same prayer 75 times. Lord, help me get one more. He did all of this without a weapon, without any way to defend himself, armed with nothing but faith, courage, and an unbreakable commitment to his beliefs. The men who threatened to shoot him in basic training owed their lives to him. The officers who tried to have him discharged ended up recommending him for the Medal of Honor. Captain Jack Glover, who had despised Desmond and tried to get rid of him, later said Desmond was one of the bravest persons alive. The entire 7th Infantry Division came to see his name as a symbol of outstanding gallantry, far above and beyond the call of duty. Desmond never bragged about what he did. He never sought glory. When people asked him about his heroism, he always deflected, always gave credit to God, always emphasized that he was just doing what the Bible taught him to do. Love your neighbor. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Keep the faith. Stand firm in your convictions. Serve others before yourself. These weren't just words to Desmond. They were the principles that guided every action he took. There's a lesson in Desmond Doss's story that transcends the specific circumstances of World War II. It's about the power of standing firm in your beliefs, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. It's about proving your worth through actions, not words. It's about the kind of courage that doesn't come from weapons or violence, but from an unshakable moral center. Desmond showed that you can be a pacifist and still be a warrior. You can refuse to kill and still be a hero. You can serve your country without compromising your soul. The army mocked him for refusing guns. They tried to break him, humiliate him, and force him out. But when the smoke cleared and the battle was over, Desmond Doss had saved more lives than most combat soldiers with all their weapons ever could. He saved 75 men in one day at Hacksaw Ridge. He saved countless others on Guam and Leyte. He saved men who had cursed him, threatened him, and made his life hell. He saved them anyway, because that's what his faith demanded. That's what his conscience required. That's who Desmond Doss was. On that October day in 1945, when President Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Desmond's neck, he wasn't just honoring one man's bravery. He was honoring a principle, the principle that courage comes in many forms, that serving with honor doesn't require you to abandon your beliefs, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay true to yourself when everyone else tells you to change. Desmond Doss lived that truth every day of his life, from the moment he made that vow as a child never to touch a gun, to the moment he took his last breath in 2006. The 75 men he saved at Hacksaw Ridge went home to their families. They lived their lives. They had children and grandchildren. Entire family trees exist today because one man refused to leave them behind. How do you measure a legacy like that? How do you quantify the impact of one person's unwavering commitment to saving lives? The ripple effects of Desmond's actions on May 5, 1945, continue to spread outward through time, touching lives that will never know the full story of how they came to exist. Desmond Doss was 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighed about 150 pounds. He was soft-spoken, gentle, and kind. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't act like a hero. He was just a man who believed deeply in the sanctity of human life and the teachings of his faith. But when the moment came, when his brothers needed him most, when 75 wounded soldiers lay dying on a blood-soaked plateau surrounded by enemy forces, Desmond Doss became exactly what a hero should be. Not someone who seeks glory or recognition, not someone who boasts about their accomplishments, but someone who sees what needs to be done and does it, regardless of the cost to themselves. The next time someone tells you that standing up for your beliefs is naive, that principles are nice in theory, but impractical in the real world, that you need to compromise who you are to succeed, remember Desmond Doss. Remember the man who was told he'd never make it, who was mocked and threatened and abused, and who then went on to accomplish something so extraordinary that Hollywood had to tone it down to make it believable. Remember that courage and conviction are not weaknesses. They are strengths that can move mountains, save lives, and change the world. Desmond Doss proved that one person, armed with nothing but faith and determination, can make a difference that echoes through eternity. The Army mocked him for refusing guns. Then he saved 75 men at Hacksaw Ridge, and in doing so, he showed us all what it truly means to be a hero.